It's all about love. At 22 minutes past 8 a.m., Eki Che and Ronnie Semuju. Well, we've been in a season where we have witnessed either we have siblings, brothers, sisters, or children, and who have gone through the pandemic and have equally been affected in education. We have a rare opportunity of hosting a guest who's been here before and very passionate about education, our dear friend who is a senior program officer at Uwezo. That is Faridah Nassereka. And something that you didn't know, that there was a report that was done by Uwezo, and it's the National Learning Assessment Report 2021. And we reports are made so that they can inform, plus also educate and help policymakers make the right decisions. And so this morning we are going to just look into that report and just highlight the findings of the report, and also what next for our children, our parents, and for all those with learners at school. Good morning, Farida.
Good morning. How are you?
Well. How are you doing? You look good. The
Thank you.
COVID has not...
It has come with a lot of challenges, but
It's a whole new brand new
the month is coming to the end.
The month is coming to the end. But it's good to have you in studio once again.
Thank you.
And we do thank the team from Uwezo to allowing you to come and just share with us. So, the report. Could you just tell us a bit about the report before we get into the findings?
Okay.
Yes.
So this report is released every 2 years, and it's about the learning outcomes of children in Uganda.
Okay.
We conduct these assessments to really find out whether our children have the competences in reading and numeracy, and we usually title it our children learning. So the last report, which we released last week, was conducted in 29 districts, nationally representative, household based. Children were at home during the lockdown, so we reached out to homes. We also visited schools to get to understand the environment in schools, what is in place, even regardless of the lockdown, what is in place that is in store for our learners.
Yes.
So this assessment was done in August and September 2021 in 29 districts, like I earlier mentioned. And we were able to reach out to over 15,000 learners within the ages of 4 to 16 to actually find out whether they are learning or they have acquired the skills and competences that are required.
Even when the country was silent.
Exactly, because learning, we had continuous learning. Learning was happening every day. The government distributed materials, they were called self-learning materials. We had parents on their own
getting teachers,
getting involved,
to coach,
having teachers on board. Others were doing the teacher role themselves, and
some radios were even airing
radio and TV programs.
So there was learning.
Yes, there was continuous learning happening. And so during that period, we gave out numeracy and literacy assessments to really find out whether the foundational skills were really acquired.
Okay, so now that we've given us a background of the report, what did you find on the ground?
So this year's report has quite a number of exciting findings, mainly around participation in education, the learning outcomes that we usually actually always front when we conduct these assessments, and then issues related to learning during the school closure,
the
COVID-19. So we have really found out from the report around participation. We realized that usually children in the lower classes by age 6 are already attending school.
By
age 6. That is the official age of entry in school. But then the report reveals that we have a lot of overage children who were not yet in school.
Okay.
Of course, now schools are fully open,
Yes.
but we are seeing that gap of the almost 2 year closure has affected the age of entry in schools. So you're going to find in P1 you have mixed ages of the 6-year-olds who are actually the right
Supposed
age
to
of
be in the
entry.
group.
Yeah,
Then you have
from
overage children, 8 years, and they're studying with 6-year-olds or even 10-year-olds.
Like in P1.
Because yes, even by that time we realized that the already existing gap of late age entry now was already
Widened.
widened by the fact that there's been that closure for about 2 years. Yeah.
With this, is that a big problem? Is that a point of concern that you have overage children in
lower classes.
in the lower class?
Definitely, because you realize that, for example, 39% of the children, when we compare with the last assessment we conducted,
Yes.
39% of P1 children were aged 8 years old, compared to 2 years back in 2018, 4 years, almost 4 years, when we had only 33%
Okay.
of that age. Remember, they're already overage, 8-year-old in P1, but you're seeing an increment of around
From 33
almost
to 39.
7%
Yes.
increment.
Okay. Yes.
So you're realizing that because of the pandemic, we've realized that children are actually not entering school at the right age, and the situation is actually getting worse.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh. Wow. So that is number one. All children are in lower classes.
Exactly.
Bana bakulu bali mu bibiina
ate
eby'abaana bato.
eby'abaana abato basoma n'abaana abato. So usually when you're older and you're studying with younger children, those are issues that will lead to dropouts.
Yes.
Because you don't fit in with the younger ones. You're already studying late. You're already appearing very mature, and then before you know it, some of the children actually start dropping out of school. One of the things we actually also investigated was the issue around the phase when schools were reopened, especially for the candidate classes and semi-candidate classes. We asked whether children had returned to school, and if they hadn't returned to school, what was the reason? Because that is also related to participation. Every day a child is expected, when the school term is on, to be in school. But many of them, actually about almost 44%, said because of the fear for the COVID pandemic, of course this has emotional and psychological effects on the children. They were not able to return to school because of the fear for getting COVID-19.
Yes.
And we realized many of them had lost children, lost parents, relatives, and that fear for going back to school really hampered their
That's all the
participation.
myths that were surrounding COVID.
Exactly. Exactly.
Your stomach boils like this.
But you also know that when those students reported to school, they brought COVID home. And then they spread the infection even further. So that's
exactly. And then another key issue actually that was raised was the issue related to finances, the high costs, the high school costs and charges embedded that kept many of them away from school. So you realize that the issues around cost are still actually a major hindrance for children's access to school.
Even up to today.
And you can't really tell now whether all the children who are actually in school by the time of the COVID-19 pandemic have actually gone back to school. So they still need for further research to really investigate what has been the hindrance to return to schools and things like that. But the report actually flagged that, with regard to continuous participation and access to schools, the issues around COVID-19 and costs really kept children away.
And it is worse when it comes to children with disability.
Exactly. Yes. And for children with disability, these you would actually see that these were still kept. Normally, in the normal situation, they still are the ones who are affected most by issues of access to school.
That's
Parents
true.
keep them in homes. Even when they go to the schools are not
stigma.
well resourced to cater for these children with special needs. You find a school does not have a teacher who's trained in special needs education. They do
Sign
not have
language.
the facilities
have
for
ramps,
braille.
yes.
They don't have the ramps. And so issues around access also become really a very major hindrance
Yeah,
to the children with disabilities.
Yeah.
Absolutely. What other findings were in the report?
Now, when we come to issues related to learning,
Mhm.
because we investigated participation, what is
Yeah.
it like? Then now about learning,
Mhm.
we did realize that there was some slight improvements
Okay.
in reading, especially.
Okay.
The learning
Interesting.
outcomes flag that there's elements of, improvement, especially with the upper classes. But with the lower classes, we still see a significant number of children not being able to read.
Yeah.
For example, if we compare with what we found out in 2018, about 6% of the learners were at non-reader level. That is a child who cannot even identify any letters of the alphabet.
Whoa.
Even when you ask them to just mention
letter.
any
And,
letters.
if I could, at what level was this? Was this the upper class or the lower class?
Ages 4 to 16,
4 to
covering
16.
all classes.
Okay.
And 4 to 16, we usually are having the preschoolers, the ones in nurseries. And by that time, they at least
They
have
should
pre-literacy
be
skills.
yeah.
They can be able to write the alphabet
Yes.
or identify some letters. But again, you see that even for children who are in P1, P2, P3, still the same.
There was a
Non-readers
challenge, yes.
increased 6.2% in 2018 to 11.6% in 2021.
That's huge.
So
That's
the
huge.
effects of the COVID pandemic are actually being evident, that children who would have been in class
Yes.
are actually not in class, and it's evident that they can't read.
Yes.
They cannot read. So we need to do something about that. And
That's a dangerous thing.
exactly. But the upper classes, there's bits of points to celebrate, that maybe the foundational skills they acquired while in the lower classes are actually being continuously
in the upper classes.
in the upper classes.
But where
continuously
we are
upheld.
at now with the 11.6% of kids not being able to identify within even in those different ages, doesn't that pose an issue for later on the caliber of students that we are having?
Right.
Exactly.
If-
And
yes.
remember, this is covering classes P3 to P7.
Yeah.
So you find like there are still some possibly 13-year-olds or 14-year-olds in primary 7 or in primary 6 who still have challenges in reading.
Yeah.
And hence may lead to a dropout. from
Exactly.
class.
Exactly.
Oh wow. Okay. That is for
That was English.
learning. Yes.
Uh-huh.
English and numeracy.
And in numeracy, there've been some improvements.
Yes.
We are looking at about an increment of about 3% from 45% in 2018 to 48%.
Yeah.
But we only see that it's not until primary 5 that you get to see such positive results.
Okay.
Again, the issue is still with these lower classes, meaning the point where these foundational skills are impacted in these learners, there's where we are seeing the gaps. We need to see teachers really playing a supportive role,
Yes.
parents coming in, because the issues around education are not only school issues,
Yeah,
they
not
are
just
also
visiting,
parental issues, community issues.
Yeah.
So the lower classes, the lower ages are actually still
Doing badly.
doing badly.
In line with that, with the parents and having an impact. Ronnie Semujo, how well can you read in your local language?
I can actually read very well in my local language. That's Uganda. I am actually a very you'll give me a Bible here in Uganda and I'll show you a little bit.
Chema Cheli.
I read Uganda very fluently. Uganda was compulsory in my high school. where I
In your
came
high
from.
school, it was
Yeah.
compulsory.
Yes.
But
My mother is from
Lugisu.
Uganda.
But that's not so correct.
My mother is
But
from Uganda.
Lugisu,
Well,
Lugisu.
I can't read it, of course, because I can't even speak it. You understand?
Okay,
Yeah.
that's a challenge. I say I can fairly read if you give me an Ateso Bible. I can fairly read. But that also is part of the learning. Remember, as you take a break,
We are going to
the
we are
government.
going to put you to a test here.
Yes.
We are going to get
we'll do that.
online a test of
We'll do that. But the government had said they should be learning in our local languages.
Especially in the lower
In the lower
classes.
classes.
Yeah, considering the thematic curriculum.
Yeah, so when we come back, we'll be just saying a thing or two about that. We have Faridah from Uwezo here, and talking about a report that just highlighting the findings from the report that was done during the pandemic. And there was a time that the government had mooted a plan to try and have local languages being taught in lower classes, children being taught in local languages in the lower classes. And of course there was chaos within the city in that sense. How do you do that? But could you just say something about that before we move to continued learning during school closure?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So the issue about local languages and instruction in lower classes is actually a policy. There's the thematic curriculum. There's the language policy that guides the implementation of the thematic curriculum in the lower classes, P1 to P3, where at least learners should be instructed in the language they understand, the language of the catchment area. And it's being implemented for classes primary 1 to primary 3. But of course with gaps, again, the teacher might not be a native speaker of the language. Then you have a class that has multiple speakers of different languages. And so it becomes a little bit complicated. But yes, we did also, from our findings, we found out that in the lower classes, where this thematic curriculum is actually supposed to be implemented, we're seeing gaps again in reading, especially classes P1 to P3. The last time we did the assessment in 2018, learners in P3 who could not read or sound out any letters in the local language alphabets were 40.5%. But this has increased to 54%, about 55%.
14 or 15%
exactly.
increase.
And we are seeing it actually in regard to the same way we saw it in English reading, with the non-readers in the lower classes increasing significantly. And it's possible because of this closure of schools. You realize children who would have been in school were actually not in school. So they didn't have any chance of interfacing with any learning materials in their local language to enable them be able to read and do tasks in the local language. But interestingly, in the upper classes, children are now being able to read in their local languagues. But you're seeing this gradual, they keep carrying on from one class to another, and if they've carried on with those skills, then they still gradually apply them in the upper classes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Two more highlights from the report: continued learning during school closure and resources, and then we'll have to get into way forward. Yes.
So the issues around continued learning also highlight the fact that, of course, like usually with phone out, girls have actually shown improvements in reading better than boys across all regions. Yes, reading, I think because of issues related to maturation, girls actually mature faster, and they're displaying that they are actually able to read faster than boys. When you look at the regional comparisons in Central, the Central region versus the Eastern region, you realize that about 60, almost close to 65% girls are able to read.
Wow.
Okay,
Wow.
they're able to read words in English, compared to about 34% girls in the eastern region. But of course, that is a huge gap.
Yes.
Why is it that these ones in the central are reading at a much higher rate
Right.
than those in the eastern region? So you're still seeing issues around inequity
Yes.
and the fact that it affects learning outcomes, inequity in distribution of resources, inequity in access to schooling, that is also implicated in these findings.
Okay.
Yeah. So whereas you realize that girls are reading better than boys, there's still a disparity
the
in
regional.
the regions
Regional
that also
balance,
needs to be addressed.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Then again, when we look at children with disability, you still realize that yes, there are also those inequity gaps. They're still
It's
being
worse for
affected.
them,
It's
yeah.
worse for them
Yeah.
in a normal situation
Yeah.
where we are seeing less of children reading.
Yeah.
In the lower classes, those with disabilities are actually affected more.
And you'd mentioned that in the resources, many of the parents had challenges taking their kids to school because either they just didn't have the money, number one, or it felt like the funds were increased for school.
Yeah, that's a
Yeah.
help.
With these highlighted areas, what would be our way forward as the people who are affected, as the people who are in this country and in these communities?
Okay. One of the things I would like to highlight is in relation to the issues with now the schools.
Yes.
And that's when I'll come in with a recommendation. We did visit schools and were able to take down some information and collect data on the number of teachers they had, those who had returned even when schools were temporarily reopened. And we realized that still the pupil-teacher ratio is still extremely high. Extremely high. The pupils are really, really very many compared to the number of teachers available. So one of the issues we need to do is to actually continue to see that schools, especially the government schools, are actually resourced with the teachers, because the learners are there, but the teachers are actually not there. And now we realize that even with COVID, they realize that they can be able to make money out of the profession.
More money.
So schools are actually crying. There are those gaps. Teachers have not turned up. And already it was a gap before. The children, the children are there ready to learn, but the teachers are absent. They're not enough. So we need to demand or to see that the issues around teachers and teacher distribution in schools is worked on. Then the issue around ECD, early childhood education, where we are looking at access to nursery schools and pre-primary education, is actually a crucial issue. We've seen reading and numeracy being lower. Children in those classes, P3, lower classes of primary, the lower classes P1 to P3 having challenges with reading. We are seeing non-readers, non-numerate children. But the issue is that if these children have acquired pre-primary or primary education and have accessed it, it prepares a child for the primary level education.
Yes.
And the time this child progresses through these other classes, they've at least had some bit of preparation that would enable them acquire the basic skills in numeracy and literacy.
Wow.
Then another issue would be around supporting teachers already, those who are in school, supporting them and motivating them to ensure that the child actually benefits at the end of the day. The teachers are there, the teachers are there working in tough conditions with mature age children. Then they've been pushed. Government said automatically promote to the next class.
By vote, yes.
So, but how is this teacher going to cope with a mixture of learners, those who are able to access the private tutor,
and
those who had the access to the materials, the self-study materials distributed by government, those who actually never did anything in the 2 years.
Who are playing.
And now they've promoted them to another
Wow,
class.
wow,
So
wow.
the teacher has to be supported with kind of remedial support
Yes.
to ensure these learners are able to catch up regardless of the situation. Can we count on some approaches that have worked where they have catch-up lessons,
Yes.
catch-up classes? It's actually very good that the abridged curriculum has been put in place,
Yeah.
where the non-relevant or essential has been pulled out to enable these learners actually catch up faster, but they need to also be supported
Yes.
with the teachers.